I don't think it's fair to put all of our faith into one person, one type of diet, one type of healthcare. I think our bodies are constantly evolving, our environments are constantly evolving. There's things that cause inflammation in our bodies that may or may not be attributed to certain things in our environment or our diet that we need to evaluate. It's just important to continue kind of digging and asking why and thinking about, is there anything that I could potentially try or change that might influence the situation for a better outcome before just taking one diagnosis?
It's all in your head. You don't look sick. Your tests are normal. It's probably anxiety. There's nothing wrong with you. Have you heard these words from physicians, family, and friends? If you're someone who has been struggling and swirling through the revolving door of healthcare to find answers about your health, or if you know someone who is going through this experience, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast with Laura Nozica, a show dedicated to exploring the challenges of living with undiagnosed or rare medical conditions. This podcast explores both sides of the bedside. We will be speaking with patients who have had challenges with finding a diagnosis, along with experts in the field. I'm your host, Laura Nozica. Please note, I am not a medical professional, nor am I affiliated with any healthcare, pharmaceutical, or device company. I am an entrepreneur, and I am an independent market researcher focused on helping healthcare organizations better understand the patient perspective. The podcast is not meant to offer medical advice, but to merely share the stories and perspectives of podcast guests. Hello, and welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. I'm your host, Laura Nozica, and today I am with Pamela Wirth, who is a really cool lady doing really cool things, and you'll learn more about that and her journey with her son and where that has all led her. But let me tell you a little bit about Pamela. Pamela is a hockey mom, lifelong learner, Carnegie Mellon trained MBA, former public company executive, management consultant, author, and health enthusiast. So she's had no dull moments as far as I can tell. She founded Hello Health with doctor-formulated supplements following a neurodiversity diagnosis of her son, and is dedicated to nutrition, education, and building a network to help heal more people, particularly those with neurodiversity, autoimmune, and autism syndromes. Pamela enjoys health and wellness, traveling, and helping others, specifically enabling people to feel better from the inside out. She combined these passions along with her experience while living in Europe and Asia, and her collaboration with U.S. doctors and other families to write Hello Health and soon to be published Saving My Son. She also has a podcast called Encouraging Wellness, which I've listened to a few episodes, and I am looking forward to hearing more about your journey. So thank you, Pamela, for being with me today, and welcome.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so happy to be here.
Terrific. Well, you have an interesting story, and like some of my other podcast guests, it has started off with their children, and journeys have started in all different places. But for you, where you are now and where you've come has all started with your son. So I'd love to learn about your son and where things stand with him today. But tell me about where it all started.
Yeah, well, I always like to start by saying it's got a happy ending. So, be rest assured as you're listening that everything is okay. He's now a thriving teenager, elite athlete, and straight A student in school. So that's the good news.
That's
The not
fantastic. Yeah. Proud mama you are.
Yes, a lot of heartache and tears along the way, but you know, and I think it's true with a lot of people, as I found in chatting, is we tend to think everything's fine, and then they start kindergarten, first grade, and then you start getting those opinions from others, and then you start getting people saying, oh, maybe his diet's not quite right, or maybe he's got ADD, or have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And so all that information really starts coming at you. And I only say this because you've really got to trust yourself as you're going through journeys through health and wellness. Only you knows your body, and only you knows really how to take care of your children. It's very, very easy to lean on others and take their opinion. And if I had done that from the get-go, we'd be in a very different place today. And so
Well,
around the age of 5 and a half, he was in kindergarten, perfectly normal child, and then started exhibiting weird eye ticks, weird vocalizations, like kind of clearing your throat, kind of grunting, would kind of like shake his head a little bit in a strange way and shoulder shrugging. And then it would regress into his eyes being constantly dilated, sleeping too
oh,
much. He even reverted to crawling one night, which was like, what is going on? So
wow.
it went to we live in a medium-sized city and belong to a decent-sized pediatrician practice, like I would imagine most people. And so we went to one pediatrician practice and they said, oh, it'll be allergies. And I was like, no, I don't think it's allergies. And so then, a few days later, waited and went to another pediatrician in the same practice. And they were like, oh, kids will be kids. Don't worry about it. Oh, this doesn't feel right either. And so then I sent my husband. I was like, all right, your turn. This is Sean. And he didn't get much either. They said, it could just be depression, anxiety, or something at school bothering him. Do you want some Prozac? And we were like, no, no, he's only 5 and a half. Let's not, it seems a little too early for that. Anyway, this continued on. I went to a different pediatrician practice. And then I think it was around appointment 6. It all of a sudden I woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, all right, so it's affecting the speech. It's affecting like tics. And so that seems like
Wow.
a motor thing or a muscle thing or whatever. And I was like, I wonder if it's the brain. And so then I found a neurologist, MD. Thankfully, this person believes in treating the whole body. I had no idea what any of this meant at the I just really, really, really got lucky that I picked the right neurologist, the first thing, and granted took a while to get into her. So we were pretty stressed about this.
And
So
and didn't you say, Pamela, that very few of these physicians that you saw were unwilling to run lab work, that was difficult to get?
none of them offered it. And
Hmm,
and we do that in adults all the time, right? Like you go to the doctor and like, hey, let's pull
sure.
some tests and find out what's going on. But they rarely do that in kids. And my hope through sharing this story is that we all start to lobby a little bit harder for getting tests so that we actually know what we're dealing with. So this neurologist, the first thing she said is, let's pull some blood work and find out what's going on inside. And I was like, okay, light bulb goes off. That actually makes sense to me. And lab work came back. He was low in vitamin D3, low in B12, genetic marker MTHFR, which about half the population has. And if you have that, you really, really need methylfolate to absorb your vitamins and minerals correctly. Otherwise, you just don't quite absorb them at the same rate or holistically. And frankly, folic acid is quite harmful to people with MTHFR. And so you need to
Oh,
stay away from foods enriched with folic acid and just add methylfolate, which is super affordable. You can find it for like $9 for, like 30, 45, 60 days at your natural food store, Amazon, whatever. So that was interesting. And then he had a virus called CMV, which apparently is pretty common among school age kids. It just kind of like flu-like symptoms, whatever. And then he had high strep titers in his blood, even though he was negative for strep throat. So I was like, that's interesting. That can be a thing. And the doctor said, look, all these things going on at once, his immune system's not working properly. The infection has now crossed the blood brain barrier and is causing motor, vocal, and mood problems. And I
oh,
was like, huh. So I said, now what? She goes, well, we need to treat the infections. I'm going to teach you how to make supplements at home made out of plants that will break the blood brain barrier and start to attack those infections that are stuck in there because they're hidden behind the biofilms and it's hard to get through. And it's going to take a long time. It's going to take about a year, but he's going to be fine. She said, are you on
mm,
board? I said, yeah. And I said, what else? And she goes, well, you need to remove things that can make the gut unstable. We need to fix his gut. It's like, what does that mean? And she said, well, your gut's made up of good bacteria and bad bacteria. And your bad bacteria likes to eat lots of sugar so that it grows faster and faster and outnumbers the good bacteria. And I was like, all right. So she goes, you need to basically get rid of sugar and simple carbohydrates because those turn into sugars in the gut. And I said, so what does that mean? And she said, well, does he like his chicken fingers and his macaroni and cheese? And I said, of course. And she said, well,
mhm.
you're going to
He's
need
a
to start,
kid. Things that kids love, even adults.
yeah, you're going to have to start to pull those back or, start to modify a little bit. I was like, all right, all right, all right. And sure enough, about a year passed and he popped back and he hasn't left us since. And so I
Wow.
think it
And
was,
what kind of doctor were you seeing that had all these amazing recommendations and light bulb moments for you?
a neurologist. So she had a different way of looking at health and wellness. I think it was her upbringing in Asia that, allowed her to kind of think about the body holistically.
That's really something because you went through how many doctors before you got to her?
5, 6, somewhere around there.
Pamela, when we were talking before our interview, our pre-interview chat, and you were telling me about your son's journey and all the testing that you had done, and now you were getting to the point of, I'll just call kind of the weird stuff, the least thought of tests that your son can have. And one was pushing the physicians, and I don't recall which one it was. You can tell us about that. But you had an inkling or did some research that getting your son's tonsils tested might be a good thing to dig a little more, because you had learned something about strep, I think it was.
Hmm. Yeah, so I found that so he had high strep titers in his blood, meaning he had a strep infection, but he didn't have strep throat. And so then I did a deep dive on how that can be. And strep likes to hide in the adenoids, the tonsils, and the heart. I was like,
Hmm.
okay, well, that's kind of scary. And he had had his adenoids taken out when he was a baby. So I thought, well, it can't be that. And so then we went to the ENT, and this guy's in his 60s. He's been around the block, and he was open to the fact that he might not know everything. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I said, hey, what do you think about pulling his tonsils? Because I said, he's got this infection, and it may or may not be able to be taken care of, with some of these antibiotics that we've got him on. But when he's on the antibiotics, he's doing great. And then when he goes off the antibiotics, then all of a sudden, the symptoms start to come out again, some of the ticks. And I was like, that's weird.
Hmm.
I think it's the infection. And he said, well, his tonsils look normal. I was like, okay. I said, I really, really think, everything I'm reading is that I understand that they're good for the immune system, but if they can potentially be hiding something in his body, and apparently they hide behind this biofilm that you can't necessarily get to. And I said, I want to take him out. And he goes, all right, fine. And I said, and I want to have him cultured. I want to know what's inside. And he said, well, that's going to cost extra. We don't usually do that. And I said, well, for all the effort we're going through, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the tonsillectomy went fine. Yes, I talk about diet, but after the tonsillectomy, I was like, what do you want? He goes, I want chicken fingers and macaroni and cheese. And I said, fine.
Oh.
He ate them right
Oh
then.
boy.
So I thought that was,
Sorry to disappoint you, but
I
yeah.
know, it was funny. But so then we went back to the follow-up appointment, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks later, whatever it was. And I said, hey, doc, and he said, oh, he looks great. And I said, did you ever find out what was inside those? And he goes, oh, no, I didn't. Let me go find out. So he comes back in, his face is just completely just ashen, without color. And I said, what's up? And he said, I've been around a long time. And I said, yeah. And he said, I have never seen a version of strep like this before. He said, it's highly resistant, and we need to put him on one of the last types of antibiotics called rifampin just to knock it out in his body. And I said, great, let's do it. And then after that, he was good to go. But we never, ever would have done that. And, you got to remember our bodies are like houses for all these, things, fungi, viruses, bacteria, and when they see an invader, they go and hide. And then when the invader's gone, so to speak, when the antibiotics have worn off, then they come back out again. So, just because you're giving somebody a Z-Pack doesn't necessarily mean you're taking care of the infection. So again, the need for some really cost-effective testing just to make sure you're really hitting the right stuff. Otherwise, you're just destroying your body. I mean, the antibiotics really are hard on your body.
Yeah. How did his symptoms change after the antibiotic that killed out the strep, that
Oh,
form of strep? How did his symptoms change for the better?
oh yeah, no, he no longer had, weird vocalizations, ticks. I mean, it just that, and then along with the supplements we were doing, his levels just continued to climb, and he felt great and slept well and wasn't depressed, wasn't anxious, didn't have,
Wow.
dilated eyes. I mean, it just all kind of comes together. It's just kind of wild.
And what kind of research had you done to learn about where strep lives and that it could be dormant in the body?
I was going through like PubMed, NIH. I mean, I was going through every type of thing I could potentially find that was published and seemed real. Taking a look at different, files that are published by Stanford, UMass, Harvard. I mean, you name it. I'm reading, 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 trying to figure this all out.
Are there some main hubs that you would recommend for people to go to look for that kind of information? You mentioned PubMed. Is that public? Is that available to the public?
Oh yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Any others
So
that you found helpful?
the NIH puts out lots of published papers as well.
Cool. So these enlightened aha moments for you and your son, what are you thinking at the time in terms of what this healthcare system is all about and what it's teaching you as you're going along from doctor to doctor?
Well, it really scared me half to death. I even had one doctor tell me he was now autistic and I had to take care of him the rest of his life because he was regressing so quick. I was like, now autistic? What are you talking about? Like, there's got to be a reason why someone changes like that. And so I just, people are not taught everything at the at one time. I don't think it's fair to put all of our faith into one person, one type of diet, one type of healthcare. I think our bodies are constantly evolving, our environments are constantly evolving. There's things that cause inflammation in our bodies that may or may not be attributed to certain things in our environment or our diet that we need to evaluate. It's just important to continue kind of digging and asking why and thinking about, is there anything that I could potentially try or change that might influence the situation for a better outcome before just taking one diagnosis. I
Mhm.
think nowadays there's so much going on that I don't think a certain diagnosis takes into account everything. I truly think everything is more of a puzzle and you've got to move the puzzle pieces around and the puzzle pieces change with time as well. And so we've just got
Mhm.
to be thinking about how to best optimize our bodies.
As a parent, what told you that these initial diagnoses just weren't right? You said your intuition or your gut was telling you different. How did you get to that place?
I mean, a lot of fear and a lot of doubt. And I just kept thinking there's gotta be another way. There's gotta be another way. And then my husband and I would fight over it. We would both go back and forth like, no, it is what it is. Let's start looking for programs. We're going to have to accommodate and da, da, da. And then we'd be like, no, no, that's not it. And then we would sometimes be on the same page and sometimes not. And it was really stressful.
So once you got to the neurologist and she starts talking about plants and supplements and things like that, how are you reacting to that as an option?
I was willing to try anything. And it was only because I was so desperate that I was willing to try anything. I don't know if you had told me at the first doctor appointment that that's what we needed to do, that I would have believed them. And so it's unfortunate that we have to get so desperate to try things that frankly are within arm's reach that are cost effective.
What would you say to a parent to get comfortable with the idea of don't just take the first diagnosis or first recommendation? How do you get to that point? Because there's a lot of people who might go to a doctor and could be of a generation that, well, what the doctor says is what I should do. How do you get comfortable, and especially for a child, to say, no, what's the next option?
I mean, so the way I kind of reasoned it in my mind was whenever I get something fixed at the house, like something big, I typically get three bids. Why is this any different?
True. Yeah, true. And how long was that journey from the time you said he was about 5.5, where he was presenting with these symptoms? How much time had gone by, and what kind of doctors did you see before you got to the neurologist that gave you the light bulb moments?
Mostly just pediatricians. And so after we got through the neurologist and then she started talking about the immune system, I was like, all right, well, let's go find an immunologist.
Hmm.
And so we met with the immunologist who was blown away by how this worked. And he asked me and the neurologist to write up the protocol, which we gave to him. And he's now treating others because he had always treated a certain way. And I said, no, I really don't want to do that. He had wanted to do IVIG, which is you put a
Mm.
port in the body and then you're putting lots of IgG from other people into the body, which kind of resets it like a computer, if you will, but it doesn't seem to be permanent. It's expensive, very invasive. And I thought, if we're fighting immune issues, why would I open up the body and present a potential new source of infection when we could potentially take care of this another way? So he was completely blown away that we did that without having to do IVs.
Wow. And how long was that journey then until you got
Yeah.
some answers to use supplements? And how comfortable were you using supplements?
Yeah, I was really uncomfortable at first. And it was probably 6 months of trial and error, plus, the year. And it took about 6 months to get into different doctors. So it was probably about a year and a half, almost 2 years before we were good to go. And I had people saying, "Why are you giving him boswellia, which is frankincense? Why are you giving him turmeric?" And I was like, "Well, they tell me that it's antibacterial, antiviral, antioxidant, helps his body detox, helps the inflammation." And they were like, "Well, isn't that kind of scary?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, if you read the caution labels on some of the things that we get, those are kind of scary too." So I said, "Well,"
Mhm.
and, we got his kidneys tested regularly and they were completely normal. Consequently, they were not normal when he was on high doses of Advil and antibiotics in the beginning to treat the infections. But once we got off of those and implemented the plants and the supplements, the kidneys went back to normal. So it just kind of reiterated to me that the body will heal itself when given time, given the right nutrients. But yeah, super scary.
Yeah, I bet. Because I think the idea, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but maybe for a lot of other people, that the idea of going a more natural route for a condition for treatment is kind of scary or sounds very like woo woo voodoo, and getting comfortable with that versus physicians writing prescriptions for a lot of people
Yeah,
is
to that. No.
hesitate. There's a lot of hesitation.
Yeah. And I'm not opposed to that at all. I mean, we certainly did both. I think as much as you can do things naturally, I think it's a good idea, especially if it naturally helps the body detox and get back into balance.
So, how many years went by until you, or how much time went by until you found that this was working for your son and he was turning around, turning the corner?
It was about 30 days into the supplements and we started to see improvements. And then every quarter we drew blood to
Hmm.
verify that that was in fact the case. I'm kind of a numbers nerd and I like to know that I've got the data, which is why I really, really, really feel strongly about testing. I think if we can start to test more around nutrition, the presence of any infections and genetic markers, I think we've got a much better chance at optimizing everyone's health and wellness. And I know that there's cost effective ways to do it.
Yeah. So now is it still this neurologist that's doing the testing, or did you find a different kind of physician who's willing to do the quarterly testing on your son?
It was a combination of both. So first we did the neurologist and then we moved on to the immunologist when he was kind of going through the last stage. And so the pediatricians are not okay with that at all. They said
Mm.
it was excessive and not necessary. I said, well, it seems like, it's made a big difference, making sure that we're on the right tracks.
How do you perceive the physicians who are less likely to consider more natural modalities for conditions like this, or even just in general? What's your assumption?
I just don't think they know. I mean, they've been taught a certain way and they're under pressure to see patients every 15 minutes. It's really not fair to them to put them into any negative light. It's just not something that they know.
As you were digging for answers for your son, is there a if you had to teach class, if you will, to other parents, is there a process that you found to be helpful that you might suggest, or what might work for you? Because if parents are at the point of just throwing their hands up with frustration, etc., what would you recommend to them to start looking at other options or digging into other possibilities?
Yeah, for sure. So we have a protocol. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'm happy to share that. It really starts first with taking notes. Write down any symptoms, any patterns. I would start with, when you go to sleep, when you wake up, what you ate, what are you feeling, any physical or mental symptoms at all. And start, really keeping that log because it's going to become very important for you to go back and take a look at that because you're not going to remember. And then, definitely going in and getting tested for any food allergies, any genetic markers, the presence of any infection. Got a list of different infections to test for. Like something like Lyme is incredibly prevalent and it presents itself in so many different ways, but some people end up with these crazy autoimmune disorders as really a secondary piece of that. Some people are diagnosed with autism when they really have Lyme. I mean, there's just some really, really crazy things that come from these bacterial infections.
Yeah, I've been reading a book about toxicities that actually was written by a physician, an MD, an internal medicine doctor who had been treating patients for a long time in the more traditional way, as we might look at it. And he just couldn't understand why he couldn't figure out what was going on with these patients, and kind of turned to a different way of thinking and went more towards the functional medicine way and started doing testing for Lyme or mold toxicities, things like that. And I think
Battles.
certainly once
That's a big.
once you've looked through those very medical, physical, clinical presentations and kind of the obvious things, it sounds like almost next steps is to look at some of these other less obvious type of conditions or allergies, et cetera.
Yeah, and the hard thing is the longer it goes on, the harder it is to undo because it just causes more and more inflammation in the body, and the body becomes accustomed to that. And so it becomes harder to detox and fix whatever the underlying issue is.
And how old is your son now?
Teenager. So I have two teenage boys, and they're both doing great.
And the son that we're talking about today, how did his life change? What's been different? How would you describe that progression from all these crazy symptoms that had no name to it to where he is now? How would you describe his journey and how he turned the corner?
Oh, he's doing great. He helped me edit the book, which was fun. And he said, "Wow, did that really happen?" I said, "Yeah, it did." So there's certain parts he doesn't remember, which is good. But he's incredibly healthy, is very careful about what he eats, and he still doesn't really touch sugar. He knows how much it negatively impacts his body. So and
Hmm.
he's
That's great. That's great. And again, we hear a lot about make your mess your message. We hear that a lot. I don't know how else to say it, but I think you know what I mean when it comes to going through something that you have something to say now. You have something to teach. Tell me about where you are now. You've created, and I'm all for entrepreneurship, especially for women, but tell me what you've created out of this journey with your son.
yeah, I really feel like it happened to us for a reason. And I feel like it was my duty to share the good fortune that we had. Granted, I used to pray to the higher power later at night, please, fix my child, I'll help humanity. So
Mm.
I had to make good on this. So I ended up writing one book, and I was really gun shy on really kind of being out there. And so I kind of hid behind some of the messaging. And so I went ahead and republished it with more doctors, more research. And so it's called Saving My Son by Pamela Wirth. And it's a compilation of not only our story, but other families and other doctors talking about different ways of healing, particularly through chronic conditions and autoimmune and autism. And so that felt really good, but it still didn't feel like enough. And so then I started the supplement company because I had a lot of people asking if they could buy them from me. And I thought, well, I'm not going to sell them out of my house. That's just crazy. So I went through the process of hiring, the formulators and the manufacturers and coming up with all the certifications and things. And so now we've got a supplement company that really supports brain, gut, and immune health. Like
That's
it's
really,
yeah.
yeah, that's really incredible. And in some of your copy on your website, I believe, or I think it was on your podcast bio, you said no one is a lost cause. Why do you believe that?
Oh, I think there's always a way. And my background is in business, and I'm more operations kind of a problem solver by nature. And so just kind of like I would do at work, nothing's ever a lost cause. Everything can be fixed. Everything can be, worked through. And same thing in our health and wellness. I mean, it's never a lost cause. There's always a way to do better and to help our bodies.
So you've heard a lot of stories. What's maybe some of the or one of the more profound stories that you've heard about maybe from the families that you've worked with that they searched and searched and searched and now they're at a point where they did find the diagnosis. Any one story come to mind?
Well, a couple of them. One of them really touches me and makes me feel good is a young teen who was nonverbal, and then after 60 days became able to start saying words, which I thought was amazing. And so the mom's super appreciative, which I think is super cool. And then I've been going. So my mom had 3 months to live for almost 5 years with a number of crazy cancers. And so one of them
Oh,
being stage 4 ovarian and colon. And so I've been taking her to a clinic And I've been learning a lot from those doctors as well, which has been incredible. And one of the patients I was talking to had come into the clinic on a Monday in a wheelchair from Lyme. And by Thursday, he could walk out back to his
Wow.
hotel, which is pretty cool. So, it's not just us. It's not just this. I just really encourage people to get really smart about not giving in to what they're being told is their lifelong diagnosis and saying, hey, is there anything else we can test for or try, particularly around detoxing the body and putting nutrients back in? I think that's really,
Huh.
really important.
A lot of this type of functional medicine, and I'd love for you to define how you would define functional medicine for people listening for one, but those who maybe don't have access to this type of practitioner because a lot of the times it's not covered by insurance. So one, if you could define it for us, and if you have any tips or anything that you can recommend that people could do who again maybe can't afford the functional medicine route or integrative, we might hear it called. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I like to think of functional integrative, and granted, our book goes through the exact definition of each on what, but for the layperson like us, it really means taking a look at the entire body, getting rid of, getting right to the root of what's going on and going from there. Yes, this is all incredibly expensive. And at one point, I
Mm.
sold a nice car I had and bought a crappy car to be able to support all this. And so I don't think that that's necessary. But what I do think is having the information at your fingertips of saying, hey, I want to test these things, those are covered by insurance. And if your doctor won't cover that, go find another doctor that will, because there are
Mm.
doctors that will. But having that in your hand and saying, this is what I want to go find out if I have or don't.
And what kind of physician would you recommend people see then for those kinds of tests that you think would be covered?
Any doctor that'll do it for you. I mean, it could be, you know, yes, in a perfect world, it would be an integrative or a functional doctor, but it could be an internist. It could be your general doctor. Just about anybody can do this. It's just a matter of whether or not they will. And if they believe in the why before we start doing anything in terms of treatment.
Where would you say folks can go to learn about what kind of tests they could need, what might be covered by insurance so that they can do some of their own research?
Yeah, I have not found a lot of great places. One thing that I do provide is a protocol as well as a lot of information on our website, which is www.hello.health. And if anybody wants additional support or wants to ask questions, please feel free to contact me anytime at Pamela at hello.health.
Perfect. What do you wish for your son at this point?
Oh, he knows just whatever really gets him excited in life and to continue to do good and help others. Both of my boys, I've tried to encourage them to be as creative and fulfill whatever it is that they do, knowing that there's an entire community around them and they need to do good in the process. So,
What would you say is the silver lining through all of this journey thus far?
I'm really happy that it's made us tighter as a family. It did not always do that. It's incredibly hard. There were a few times where we needed to go to family counseling where each person would talk independently and then we'd come together as a family because, many times what one person is experiencing is not what the other person is experiencing, particularly with siblings. It's really, really hard on the siblings. They don't necessarily get enough attention nor get to verbalize what is happening with them, witnessing what's going on with a family member. So it's not just the parents and it's not just the one with the chronic illness. So
So through all of this experience that you've had with the medical community and healthcare systems, if you had the chance, and maybe you have, if you had the chance to sit down with a CEO of a hospital system or somebody very high level from a leadership standpoint in the medical community, what would you express to them in terms of what needs to be changed, how the system could be made better when it comes to situations like your son's where you're just looking and searching, and what would you say? What roadblocks would need to get fixed?
it really comes down to cost effective solutions for them. What works for some does not always work for the masses. And so there needs to be a lot more access to cost effective testing.
So for you, it comes down to testing first, certainly testing that would be covered, of course. What do you think about the need for doctors to maybe broaden their horizons in terms of looking beyond just a very narrow focused feeling about it's this, it's this problem. It's just this. It's not beyond what they're trained in, or it's about the whole body. What do you think's missing from maybe their training, let's say?
Well, it's not as easy as it sounds. The doctor that wrote the foreword in the Saving My Son book was first an MD and then went back and got the ND. There's a lot that needs to change in the system for doctors. And it's not really fair to blame the doctors. For instance, if someone goes and gets a natural medical license, it's very, very difficult for them to go and apply and get accepted into a medical school, get an MD. Whereas, the reverse is much easier. But frankly, as this doctor was describing to me, who really wants to go for 12 or 16 years after you've got a specialty and then go for another 4 years and get an integrative designation? And as an ND, you're not even allowed to sit for an integrative medicine board. You have to be an MD. So there's so many things that are not necessarily fair in terms of education and certifications at the doctor level. And so I think and the a lot of doctors I talk to really, really do want to take care of patients at the root level, but their practices tell them they have to keep appointments to 15 or 20 minutes. Here's the protocols that we do. It's the insurance companies are squeezing them. And so they're only, making $15 after, they get squeezed so much. And then, by the time they hire somebody at minimum wage, they may or may not have made any money on the appointment they just saw you for. I mean, there's so many things that are really, really hard on doctors right now as well.
It's a stressful place to be for sure. And I like to say that I like to present perspectives from both sides of the bedside. So it's, as you said, there's a lot squeezing physicians right now, and a lot of it has to do with insurance. I certainly appreciate you bringing that up to, again, show the other side that it's not always the doctor's fault. Anything else, Pamela, that you would suggest? Any tips or other things you might suggest when it comes to seeking out a diagnosis?
You know, Definitely take a deep dive into your own lifestyle and determine if there's anything that could potentially be causing inflammation. When the doctor described to me that inflammation is the root of all disease, I kind of started to go on a deep dive of what causes inflammation. And boy, is it a long list. So, you can't get rid of all of it, but what you can do is start to take a look at your lifestyle and see, so what things can I do? For us, we lived within a relatively close of a landing pattern of a private airport. Well, that's pretty bad. That's off leaded
Oh,
fuel. We were within 2 miles of major power lines. Well, that's pretty bad for an EMF, and that causes inflammation. We had wall to wall carpet in our house. Well, that's pretty bad. It puts off chemicals for up to 20 years. So all these things, I was like, okay, so yeah, and so then we ended up moving. This place only has tile, no carpet. It does have some area rugs here and there, but it's very interesting to start to think about what you can and can't control in your own environment to
oh.
potentially help your body heal, because when it's constantly under inflammation, it's just angry is the best way to put it. And so you just got to calm things down.
And just going back to something you said earlier, you mentioned the difference between an MD, so medical doctor, versus an ND. So N is in Nancy, D is in dog. What does that mean?
Well, one of them has been through medical school and one of them has been through natural doctor school. And then we do run through this in the book Saving My Son as well, sort of some of the different designations and what that means. But it all comes down to different curriculums, different amounts of time spent in the schooling environment. And then, of course, there's the presence of any on the job training, if you will, in terms of when doctors are training in certain areas. And so all of that's kind of outlined.
Well, very good, Pamela. So we've been with Pamela Wirth. She has two books, one called Hello Health and one soon to be published called
Just
Saving My
published.
Son.
It
What's
just got
that?
it just got published. It's called Saving My Son.
Perfect. All right. Saving My Son has been published and has launched. She also has and Pamela, where can folks check out your books?
Amazon is the easiest place for just about everybody.
For sure. All right, Pamela, thank you so much for being with me today. And I want to thank you for all of your wisdom and sharing your son with our audience. And hopefully we can follow up with you as well at some point.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh my goodness, that's a wrap on another compelling story. Thanks for listening to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. If you would like more information about today's guests or to find out more about Laura, me, go to desperateforadiagnosis.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow show updates and healthcare news on the podcast's Facebook page. If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions, advice, or suggestions for our guests, please email me at lauramarie@desperateforadiagnosis.com.